Christian Eriksen is back. I don't believe it. Honestly, I don't believe it. This guy 7 months ago was face down on death's door on a football pitch, and now he's back in probably the most intense football league in the world. I'm going to explain to you how this has happened, what are the dangers of his return, and ultimately answer the question, is it safe for him to return, genuinely from a medical point of view? As I always say, if you like the video, actually hit like, bing bang, smash the subscribe bell. There you go. Right, so let's bring ourselves back up to date. Christian Eriksen 7 months ago suffered a sudden cardiac arrest while playing football, and in his own words, he died for 5 minutes. He was resuscitated and he was fitted with an ICD. Now, to explain to you what ICD is, an ICD is an implantable cardioverter defibrillator. It's an electronic device that sits just underneath the skin, just underneath your collarbone, and it has wires that connect to the heart. These monitor the rate and the rhythm of the heart at all times. And basically, if something dodgy happens, it treats the problem by either adjusting the rhythm of the heart or actually shocking the heart into the correct rhythm. That's the short of it, okay? So he's got an ICD in place and he's been recovering since. He's been released by Inter Milan because in Italy, you cannot play professional football with an ICD. And this has led us to this point. So first question, how dangerous is it and what are we worried about regarding playing professional football with an ICD in place, okay? What you need to appreciate is doing intense activity puts a lot of strain on the heart and releases a lot of adrenaline into the system, which acts on the heart. So our worries basically concern ourselves with that. As I said, the ICD monitors the rate and the rhythm of the heart at all times. So first thing we're worried about is an increased number of shocks for the patient, which is extremely traumatic, may I add, okay? The theoretical belief is if you're doing intense activity often, you're going to get more shocks, both appropriate shocks because your heart is going into the wrong rhythm, and potentially inappropriate shocks also as your heart is under so much strain, going so fast, and the ICD is trying to monitor all this best it can. You've also got to remember, if you get shocked while you're performing a particular activity, imagine you're a cyclist and you get a shock, appropriate or inappropriate, when you're cycling down a hill or up a hill, that could be catastrophic for you. So we've got to bear that into account. That's more of a practical point. The second and perhaps most important thing is that we're worried that the increased state of stress on the body, the physiology, means that if the body is shocked, if the heart is shocked by the ICD, that shock might not work. And that is catastrophic, of course, and that would lead to a second cardiac arrest. So for those two reasons, physiologically, that was the concern regarding athletes and an ICD. From a more practical point of view, as I said, the ICD literally just sits underneath the skin and you don't want to damage the ICD or its wires. You can imagine playing professional football, you can get an elbow to the ICD, it could break and all hell breaks loose, okay? So those are the dangers. Those are the dangers. Initially, the recommendations were from the American Heart Association, based on the guidelines in 2005, was that if you've got an ICD in place, you should not participate in collision sports, contact sports, or high intensity sports. And they basically have like a document saying what sports are in what category. The long and short of it is, if we go by those guidelines, Christian Eriksen would only be able to do, let me have a look, sports such as bowling, cricket, curling, golf, and yoga. The 1As, as they describe them. Mate, he might be decent at golf, but it doesn't suit him in my point of view. So with that having been said, you can imagine there are athletes out there have been doing their sport, X, Y, and Z, and doctor all of a sudden saying, sorry mate, all you can do now is bowling. And they go, nah. So as a result of that, we have a certain selection of people who have ICDs in the population that listen to the doctor's advice, just doing light, intense activities, nothing out of the ordinary. But you also have a cohort that have continued to perform their activities, high intensity sports athletes that have said, I'm going to continue despite having an ICD in. So what the clever cardiologists have done, obviously since 2005 and beyond, is just done research studies in which they compared the outcomes of those who are just kind of sedentary or low intensity activity with those that have continued their high intensity activity, okay? And they've done that research, and the research has been extremely interesting and positive. A large multinational ICD sports safety registry has shown that after a median follow-up of 44 months, there were no deaths or arrhythmia or shock-related physical injury in 440 athletes who continued organised competitive or high-risk sports after ICD implantation. The long and short of that is there was no difference in outcome between those who continued their high-intensity sport and those who decided, okay, I'm not going to do that anymore. Okay, there was no difference in outcome in terms of shocks, level of shocks, and obviously, most importantly, deaths. And there's loads of other studies like that out there. I'll put one up there, one there as well, one there as well. You can see the evidence is coming through. And as a result of that, this is why Christian Eriksen can play, okay? In 2020, the European Society of Cardiologists released new recommendations regarding athletes who have ICDs in place. And this is what they said. Shared decision making should be considered during decisions relating to continuation of intensive or competitive sports participation in individuals with an ICD. What that means is this: Christian Eriksen can play. The evidence is suggesting that his risk isn't higher than someone who decides not to play on having an ICD. That's what the evidence is suggesting so far. So what that basically means is this: Christian Eriksen can play if he understands the risks of what's going on and he wants to. As long as everyone understands what the situation is, he can play. And that's massive. And that was extremely surprising for me because I thought the recommendations would be like, do not play under any circumstances. There's something else to take into account here, right? What I think is likely in Christian Eriksen's case is that he doesn't have any underlying structural heart disease and there was no specific cause found for his cardiac arrest. Looking at some research from FIFA, in only 34% of cases were they able to find out the reason why an individual had a sudden cardiac arrest while playing football. So that's about 1/3. So Christian Eriksen is likely in that 2/3 that they just don't know why it happened. And if you look at the guidelines do change if you do have a structural heart problem. So if you have something like a HOCM or an ARVC, which I'm not going to go into the details of, if you have that, the guidelines do change and they're a lot more conservative generally. But in the case of Christian Eriksen, what it seems like is that he's had the heart attack. They've done all the checks, they've done everything, and they can't really find a reason why it happened. So they've looked at the research and said, okay, he's got an ICD in place, we know that, but what are his actual risks, okay? Forget theoretical, what is the research showing? And the risk might not be as high as we thought. So Christian, do you want to play? Yes. Clubs, do you want to sign him? Yes. Do we all understand the potential risks? Yes. Okay, let's give it a go. And that's where we are. Final point, 40% of athletes who suffered a shock from their ICD during their activity never played their sport to that level again because they just walked away. It's quite traumatic getting shocked by your ICD. Respect to Christian Eriksen. If it was me in this situation, I'd be looking for a nice little punditry job by now. You know, a little Mika Richards 1-2 punch. But that's why he's a world-class footballer and I ain't. See you lot on the next video.